Hey everybody, Kenny here. Just a little housekeeping before we get going. My Path of Exile builds are intended for casual Path of Exile players, so if you're looking for something to help you blast through pinnacle content, this isn't the place. That said, as you would have seen from the thumbnail and the title of these videos, I am theming these based on skills from the Dragon Quest franchise. Since if you've checked out my videos at all, you may be aware that I am passionate about action RPGs and JRPGs. They're my favorite genres. So blending the two was just a no-brainer for me. And in the off chance that at some point in the future my channel blows up and you're watching this when I have a high enough subscriber count that such a concern might actually be warranted, I assure you, this is not a sponsored video. Time of recording, my subscriber base is far too small for any big publisher to pay me any mind. So, not worry, this isn't some billing to promote the new Dragon Quest Monsters game or anything like that. It's just a fun idea I had for theming my content for this league. That out of the way, let's get going. So this time we're going to be emulating the Gigaslash. Now the Gigaslash has been in the Dragon Quest franchise, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's been in the franchise since Dragon Warrior 7. That's the first time I saw it. Now I have used it in the remakes of Dragon Quest 5 and 6, but I don't know if they were in the original games or if they just added them to the games in Dragon Quest 5 and 6. So as far as I'm concerned, the first game that it was actually in was 7, until I ever go through the trouble of actually playing through the original versions of those games, which I don't plan on doing. But essentially, it's pretty much like the ultimate hero attack that has appeared in Dragon Quest 7, 8, 9, possibly 10. I haven't played 10. Hopefully one day the scaled down remake comes out in the West and I will get to try it, but for now it's an MMO that only exists in Japan and in 11. Also in the Dragon Quest Hero games. As you can see from the animation that they tend to use, usually you get struck by lightning, or the weapon they're using gets struck by lightning, and they do a waving massive sword swing that tears through groups of enemies. So obviously, to emulate that, we are using Cleave as our main weapon attack. And since there's no real skill in the game that causes lightning to strike down on your weapon, we will be using the Herald of Thunder buff, since it kind of does that. Let's go find something to fight. There we go. So I'm pretty sure it wouldn't do anything for this particular situation, but this shield makes me wish I had the, I can't remember the name of the skill, but like that skill that makes you immune to temporal chains, like the curse temporal chains. I mean, I don't think it works against the shield. I think the shield slows you down regardless of if you have protection against temporal chains, but still, not a fan of getting slowed down by this guy. So how do we put this guy together? Well, let's check out the gear. All armor evasion, with the exception of our shield, which is armor energy shield. And the reason I'm using this isn't for the resistances. It's actually just because I really needed something that had 2 blue on it. And I couldn't get it to roll. Well, I mean, I had 2 blue here, but I couldn't get 2 blue and a red to roll on any of my other gear. So that's the only reason why I'm wearing this shield. And honestly, I think, actually, I mean, I'm pretty sure that this doesn't affect one of my bonuses. But I'm not 100%. That said, as we can see in our defenses, we're doing okay with our physical damage reduction, okay with our evasion. Got a nice amount of life regen, a little bit of spell suppress. We're very much overcapped on our resistances, which is good. And we've got some block chance, as well as a decent amount of health. So defensively, this character is actually doing pretty good. For accessories, still wearing the Belt of the Deceiver, since my Scion has been wearing this for, I have no idea how long. I put it on them at some point many leagues ago, and I just never took it off. But this isn't part of the build, it's just a decent piece of gear because it has the flat strength, the increased global physical, the reduced extra damage from crit, the extra life, the plus 10 to all elements resistances, and makes it that all nearby enemies are intimidated. Just a really good belt. I don't have a reason not to have this on, so she's still wearing it. He's wearing a Moonstone Ring. That's just for the resistances and also adds some extra damage to our attacks. Wearing a crit ring, but mostly for the resistances once again, and give us some extra life and regen. A Jade Amulet for more stats, some more resistances, and some more damage. Once again, the shield Nothing special. It's just a kite shield that happened to have a all elemental resistances roll on it. So it's a decent resistance shield, but otherwise doesn't really do anything for us since we're not really spec'd into shields. And our weapon is a Primeval Rapier I put together during the Crucible League. So it's got a lot of extra damage on it, as well as some additional resistances. And the extras on it are just more elemental damage, a Blade Dancer, so our sword attacks deal more damage with hits and attacks, and can hit from a little further away. And we get some extra life leech and recovery. In terms of our skills, you could see that we swapped between precision and clarity during the dungeon. I used to have both of these on, but right before I started recording this, I decided that I wanted to have summon skitterbots in here. The reason for the summon skitterbots, so you see that reserves 35% of your mana. The reason I decided to put this on was that I was trying to actively apply shock with skills like Prismatic Burst and Wave of Conviction. I was trying to do all kinds of, additional shock chants from different spells and things. And it wasn't feeling good, to play that way, with this particular build. So I decided to bring in the skitterbots because they automatically just apply shock to enemies around you. I mean enemies nearby the skitterbots, but the skitterbots are near you, so same thing. So it just automatically gives us shock on enemies, and having shock on enemies makes it that we are dealing more damage overall with all of the things that we're doing here. The precision aura is obviously important to have, especially since we're not fully specialized in accuracy. You can see our chance to hit isn't great. So if we could afford precision, we'd be using it, and which is what was happening at the beginning, was we had precision on instead of clarity. But eventually the need for resource outweighed the need for accuracy, which is when I did the switch over. And we're using, as I mentioned at the beginning, Herald of Thunder for the additional buff that happens when we kill shocked enemies, which is all the time because of the skitterbots. And it grants both our attacks and our spells increased lightning damage. Extra lightning damage, which is very important for making sure that our Wave of Conviction is primarily lightning instead of fire, since the exposure depends on what does the most damage. And while I am supporting this with physical to lightning support so that there's extra lightning damage and additional 50% of the physical damage is being converted to lightning damage, it's still important to have an extra source of lightning damage here, simply because if an enemy has more lightning resistance than they do fire resistance, then the fire resistance could the fire damage from Wave of Conviction could end up causing more damage than the lightning damage. In which case, they'll be gaining fire exposure, which won't be doing us any good. Even though we do have fire damage on the weapon here, an okay amount. We're also using Enduring Cry as our additional oh crap button, and Flame Dash is our escape. And of course our Wave of Conviction is being cast by our Battle Mage's Cry. So we do the Cry, then our Cleave makes sure that as we're attacking, we're also casting Wave of Conviction, so we're gaining the additional damage from the spell itself, as well as debuffing the enemy by making that our lightning damage is more potent, which the reason we're doing that, I'll explain when we get into the build. Then our Cleave, we're supporting with Prismatic Burst, as I showed before. Since Prismatic Burst, that's just a great source of extra damage that, why wouldn't you use this? We're also supporting it with less duration and close combat. You'd be wondering, why am I supporting it with these two instead of something better? And the main reason is that, while sure, I could put just some flat damage stuff on here, as I had mentioned before, it was really difficult to get to fit two blues with a red in my gear at all. So getting like an added lightning damage and innervate, or an added lightning damage and lightning penetration just wasn't going to happen. And I didn't want to add more fire and cold damage to this. So I decided to use these two. And in case you're wondering, like less duration, despite the name, the supported skills deal more 13% more damage. Like that is not tied to the effect duration. Like, you know, that has nothing to do with the effect duration. Like that is a completely separate thing. So those two clauses are completely separate from one another. Like the damage is there regardless of what the skill is that you're supporting. The effect duration is there regardless of if the skill does damage. You know, it's just a highly useful skill. As you can see, at 3191, take that off. 2824. So, you know, like despite the fact that like there isn't anything duration related on cleave, you can still use less duration to give yourself a big boost to your damage. And then close combat, same thing. Even though we're not like using a travel skill as part of our whole setup. I mean, we have a travel skill, but we're not using it for the purposes of dealing damage. So, like the rest of the stuff in close combat isn't really doing any good for us. But it is still giving us extra damage because of the fact that it says that deal more melee damage. Out of the way, let's look at the build. So for our Ascendancy, and this is a big reason for why I made all the choices that I did for the gear and skills. We're using Elementalist, which makes it that shocks from our hits always increase damage taken by at least 10%. We cannot take reflected elemental damage. Exposure we inflict applies an additional minus 20% to the effective resistance. And then the golem thing doesn't matter because we're not using golems. And then we're also using Inquisitor, which makes it that our damage penetrates enemy resistances. We have a chance to create Consecrated Ground whenever we hit a rare unique enemy. Our Consecrated Ground lingers, and nearby enemies take increased elemental damage. So we just fully invested in our Ascendancy into making enemies take more elemental damage, because the rest of our build, we are not focusing on that. I headed out this way. Got the extra life and regen, as well as grabbed all of the jewel slots that I could pick up. So this one, I put in one that gives physical damage to spells, as well as some flat life, some cold resist, and added spell damage while wielding a two-handed weapon. Over down this way, I picked up a jewel slot and put one that gives us extra intelligence, extra damage with a sword, and extra attack speed with a two-handed weapon. I grabbed this armor cluster here for the extra regen, the extra armor, the extra life, and grabbed the armor mastery that increases the amount of armor we get from our boots and gloves. Grabbed extra stats, grabbed more life, and reduced our skill costs. Got into this life cluster here. We not only get extra life, but we also increase the effect of our Consecrated Ground. Which, since we are passively doing that using our Ascendancy, just good synergy to grab that. Because we have so much strength in this build, I grabbed Iron Will, which gives us a ton of damage to both our Prismatic Burst and our Wave of Conviction. Went into the big life cluster, grabbed all of the life, grabbed the Path of the Warrior for the extra armor, strength, and physical damage. Grab the life mastery for the extra flat life. Went out this way for the extra armor and evasion and elemental resistances, as well as grab this dual slot and put in one that gave us extra strength and dexterity, gave us some chaos damage to our attacks, some evasion, and extra added fire damage with sword attacks. Then this cluster here, grab the extra spell suppressed and evasion, as well as grab the evasion mastery that increases our evasion from our equipped armor. Over here, grabbed another jewel slot. This one increased our damage with swords, increased our global accuracy rating, and got some extra lightning resist. Then we got this little cluster here, which gives us some extra elemental damage with attack skills, because the only elemental damage that we're specializing in the actual tree. And then Forces of Nature, which makes it that our attack damage penetrates some of the enemy elemental resistances, which pairs very well with what we have going on here. We head down into Duelist area. Grab Master at Arms for the extra strength, regen, melee physical damage, and melee strike range. The extra life, the extra evasion and armor. And then Art of the Gladiator for the extra attack speed, accuracy, dexterity, and of course to move the penalty of wearing armor. We grab this accuracy cluster for the extra accuracy and crit chance, as well as grabbing the accuracy mastery that gives us a decent amount of flat accuracy that scales down as you level up. And more stats. In here, like the whole goal of that is to make it that our physical damage is overwhelming enemy physical damage reduction. Grabbed extra resistances, armor and evasion, more life and more regen. Then up here, where we invest in sword damage, but not just in sword damage, we also get Razor's Edge. Makes it that we overwhelm even more physical damage reduction. So we're overwhelming both physical and elemental resistances to a decent amount. Obviously not, we're not going huge in either direction with these, but the goal was just to make it that if we were going to have elemental damage, that it was a significant part of our damage, and if we were doing physical damage, then it was a significant part of our damage, instead of like going just one way and making one of our damage types feel less effective. I wanted it to be that, it feels like you're using Gigaslash from Dragon Quest, which means that, like it feels like, like you're doing a big heavy hit that hits a whole group of enemies that, are feeling the effect of a swing that's empowered by a bolt of lightning. Yeah, so I very much wanted to RP this, and I think I did an alright job at it. Anyways, that's the build. If you enjoyed and appreciate doing all YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, maybe share with a friend. But next time, Ve Victus, Fires and Numeris, and bye.